Well, good morning, everybody. If you're in the Pacific time zone, I would like to invite you to the Pennsylvania mandated training for ABA services. This is an area and training that we've been developing over the past 2 months. I know for those agencies that are in Pennsylvania, I suppose for a lot of you guys, it's a drastic change in terms of the required training, and I do understand that that's putting a lot of pressure on organizations, not only in terms of providing the training and finding the source for the training as well, but also in terms of the business need and the additional cost that's putting on the organizations. And we're not really going to get into it right now, but I just wanted to let you know, as far as us developing the training, we were really cognizant about the fact that this additional cost and the burden on the agencies has a significant impact on the profitability. And we tried to be as price conscious as possible when we were developing the training. My name is Karen Chung. I'm the CEO and founder of Special Learning and also ABA Business Growth. And I have with me Crystal Larson, who is our VP of Operations and Interim Clinical Director as well. And she actually is a BC ABA, practiced in Florida for how long, Crystal?
As a BC ABA, I'm going on 10 years in the field of behavior analysis, about 15.
Okay, so Florida actually was one of the first states, I believe, Crystal, right, who instituted something like this, a standardized training. So you've been through all of this. Pennsylvania, I know you're kind of late in the game and it seems really confusing, but just be assured that other states have gone through that, and Crystal in particular has a lot of knowledge in this area. So let's see. Just quickly, what we wanted to achieve with the training is to go over the review of the mandated training and really take it down to the next level and think about, well, what does it really mean for agencies? It's a bunch of words out there, and it's very, in some ways, it's very convoluted and difficult to read in terms of how do you interpret that. So we spent a lot of time actually reviewing the requirements, having conversations with the state of Pennsylvania in an effort to get an understanding and share that with the broader ABA community. And so this is our interpretation. It's been vetted by the state, but this is relatively new, so there's still some adjustments that are being made as well. So just quickly, reviewing the current landscape and the impact of Pennsylvania training and the mandated training and what that means. And ABA Business Growth is a special learning company, and a little bit about us and the recommended training sequence. So in addition to getting all of the trainings out of the way, you still have the annual maintenance requirements as well. And it is pretty specific in terms of what the state is requiring. So we wanted to go over that and provide some guidelines around that as well. So the Pennsylvania mandated training elements, if you break it out into individual sections that are easy to understand and we can compartmentalize, there is the initial training. And we call it the health services training because we live in the field of applied behavior analysis. Obviously, you guys provide ABA services. And this is a little bit different in that it's training that a RBT, behavior tech, or a BCBA typically would not be getting otherwise. So that's why I broke it out into initial training, which is also called health services training, just for easy identification. So additional initial training for people without previous experience. Obviously, behavior techs and frontline workers, and even BCBAs and clinical directors without any previous experience need to be shored up in terms of their knowledge base. And the 6-month training for practitioners, again, without previous experience, additional hours that are required. And all of that is a good thing. I know that the requirements seem fairly onerous, and they are, and it's very, adds a cost burden on the organization. But when you think about the objectives behind that, and ultimately it's really focusing on client outcomes because you have qualified practitioners that are providing services, it's a good thing. And the ongoing trainings for the years 2 and 3 subsequent to that as well. The categories of professionals that are impacted, clinical directors, and in our case, the language that we would use are the BCBAs, BCABAs, BCATs, licensed behavior specialists. And the language that the Pennsylvania, the mandate uses is behavior consultation, mobile therapy, behavior analytics services. And at the next level in implementation, the language and the titles that we would use are RBTs and BCAT. And according to the mandate, it is credentialing for behavior health therapist. who provide assistant behavior consultation and services as well. So what's going on right now? The state of Pennsylvania has put in a new mandate, you guys are all aware of that, that requires providers of ABA services to provide additional staff training. So we talk about mandates, and what that means is just additional training that you guys are mandated to provide, otherwise you won't be in compliance. And obviously, Crystal, can you talk a little bit about the impact of consequences of not being in compliance?
So some of the impacts are ultimately really huge to the clients. We've seen here in this state, maybe around 8-10 years ago, they did something similar to this. And again, they did another major change at the state level about 4 or 5 years ago. And what can happen is when your staff are not meeting these new requirements, and if they're not followed into those grandfathered in kind of little rules that they have, they can come back, and when they audit the program, they or your company, they can request for recoupment of funds and or even have additional fines, and in worst case scenarios, report for abuse and fraud, and which that can actually close the doors of the organization itself. And then at the end of the day, all those clients you were serving and on your waiting list will not be served, and then they'll have to try to find another provider who probably has a much longer wait list at that point in time. So it's huge to make sure that we're in compliance with any of these kind of new requirements.
So tying this back to Florida, about a year ago, there was a big scandal in Florida with Medicaid fraud. So a lot of agencies, I believe that it was about a year and a half or 2 years, probably even longer than that, that the Medicaid, right, was going through the investigations, and they came out with the ruling. But what had happened was, because they uncovered so many cases of fraud, and there's different levels of, explanation or definitions of what fraud means, because, there's a level of severity, that they imposed a 6-month moratorium on adding any ABA agencies and providers to as a Medicaid provider. And so obviously that's a big deal, because that means ultimately the people that are affected most are consumers. And we're here to make sure that the consumers are getting the types of services that they need. And because the agencies are either taking shortcuts or actually committing fraud, that we as a kind of the field are doing a lot to really negatively impact the clients that are out there who desperately need the services. So going back and tying this to it, when the Medicaid actually came up with the listing, they actually cited certain agencies, and they cited based upon, well, these are the, they're in non-compliance because of this. One agency, I think it's more, actually was cited because they had staff members that were providing services that were not qualified. Now, qualified, is a definition that Medicaid, had put in place. So this is something that they take really, really seriously. And I imagine as Pennsylvania, it becomes more mature and is getting a better understanding, they're also taking a look at what other states are going through as well. And so, I'm asking you guys to be really cautious in terms of, and be really conservative in the decisions that you're making, because the consequences of taking shortcuts here and there are pretty severe.
And just to kind of piggyback off of Karen real quick, one of the things that changed in our state here about 2-3 years ago is when they started rolling out the need for, we call them behavior assistants, your BHTs, we call them behavior assistants down here, and where they started requiring them to have the RBT certificate. For 10-15 years prior to that, that was not required, and they gave them about anywhere from 6 months to a year to transition from the behavior assistant to the RBT. And so a lot of those things that Karen was speaking on was just something as simple as them not having the actual fully certification from the BACB as an RBT. And it was just, in some situations, it was just simple oversight, and others where that they didn't really understand the implications of not having that credential from the switching of the title of behavior assistant to behavior tech in our state.
But ultimately, the consequences are the same. But going back to the Medicaid fraud, it was a 6-month moratorium, and then they extended that for another 6 months. So if you can imagine 12 months worth of services that are not being provided. And then I believe at the same time too, the payouts were being held off as well. So, a whole bunch of issues, and South Florida is a hotbed of Medicaid fraud and healthcare fraud that's going on right now. But other states are going to be looking at what's happening in South Florida as a worst case scenario. Okay, so high-level matrix, we tried to simplify our readings into, well, what makes sense? So something that we can easily understand. And we came up with this one-page matrix. Obviously, things are kind of evolving and we're checking in with the state on a regular basis. But I'm hoping that by looking at it this way, it becomes a little bit clearer, or at least it's a checklist or some sort of a guideline that you can use to determine, well, based upon your own personal situation and the people that you have, what the requirements would be. So Crystal, you developed this. I'm going to have you talk about this.
Okay, so the last time we had a presentation with Miss Amy from ABA Support Services, we actually were able to confirm with the state that, real quick, just make it really simple. If you're a BCBA, BCABA, BCBAD, you do not require to have the Pennsylvania mandated trainings. You do, however, require to have the CE activities of 16 hours per year. Then where some of the differences were is if you were considered a clinical director. If you're a clinical director without a credential from the BACB, then you would be required to do the initial Pennsylvania training. If they have experience with 2 years or more, then they don't need the additional training that's required within 6 months of hire. So we kind of break it down to, what they initially need before they can actually start working with the consumers. And then if they require additional training before they hit their 6 months of being employed or hired. And so anyone who requires additional training at the 6 months is going to be anyone who does not have history working in the field. And again, that excludes BACB credentials for the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level. Now, where it gets a little tricky is the RBTs or behavior techs. So if they don't have experience of at least 2 years, then they will not be grandfathered in. So if you have somebody that's been working with you and they already are an RBT, but they only have about a year experience, then they would, is best to be on, like Karen said, the conservative side. Those individuals will need the initial training and the additional training of the what's required within 6 months of hire. Now, if you have a RBT or a behavior tech that's been in the field for 2 years or more, maybe 5 years, then those individuals would be grandfathered in and would not require that initial or that 6 months training. However, they will require the RBT training and become RBT certified. I believe the date is July 1st of this year. So just make sure that even if they fall in that other realm where they may not require the Pennsylvania, just remember for them to actually practice after July 1st, they will have to be RBT credentialed or with the RBT training, I'm sorry.
Okay, there's tons of information and this is based upon, probably about 100 hours worth of work that Crystal has done to really understand the requirements and take the trainings and come up with a training program that is going to allow agencies to be in compliance with the Pennsylvania mandated trainings. So over here is, if you would like to go back and take a look at the code, this refers back to 5240.73, 7.3, and I believe there's 8.3 and 9.3 as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to drill down so that we can actually get a better understanding of what this means and as it pertains to your actual practice and the kind of the titles and the language and vernacular that we would be using and that would be common to agencies. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is just a breakdown and it's drilling down into the chart that you saw previously and what Crystal has talked about. And Crystal, what I'm going to do is put you on the spot and give have you give examples that respond to, hey, listen, if I have a BCBA that I've hired and they don't have any experience, what's the requirement, so that we can, really try to apply this in practice as well, because even this is a bit complicated.
Awesome. And also, Karen, while we're saying that, we do have our question box open. So if you have a question similar to this, please send them in and we'll answer them while we're here. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, well, you go ahead. You're going to have to go ahead and just review this one staffing level at a time. And I think it's important for a lot of us to actually translate the staffing title, according to the mandate, into what are some of the commonly industry job titles. Obviously, for us, we speak a lot about BCBAs, BCABAs, and now RBTs, and frontline workers I consider behavior techs and other titles that we use as well. And so, what does it mean and what categories of those workers are falling into, the categories that the state, Pennsylvania state, has actually, codified. So for example, what we would consider, people that would provide frontline services like RBTs and behavior techs, according to the state of Pennsylvania, fall into, Crystal, what? Behavior health technicians, right?
Yep, the BHT role, yes.
All right. So if you'd like to take this, please, one at a time, and maybe provide examples of what this would mean, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so Karen, you want to use your cursor? Sorry,
Right.
so I can follow with you. So in the first, just kind of reading where the chart is, it's the kind of the staffing level. So do they have a credential as a board certified behavior analyst at the master's, bachelor's, or doctor level? So do they hold a BCBA? Do they hold a BCABA? Or do they hold a doctoral level BCBA designation? Then the next column is going to be, is that person that you just hired, are they with experience? Meaning, like, do they have 2 years in the field, or do they not have experience? Meaning they have less than 2 years. Then the next column is going to be the, sorry, hi Jessica, yes, history means, like, do they have history, have experience working in, developmental disabilities, persons with autism, things of that nature, and it has to be 2 years. So that's what, you put quotes, I'm putting quotes, constitutes as history. So do they have working experience with the vulnerable population of a minimum of 2 years?
It's 2 years, Crystal, when they say
Mm-hmm.
with or
That's what
without.
I said.
Okay, that's not something that we discussed. So that is very important, because our interpretation, no, when I saw no history, I saw no experience. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a wrong understanding. Okay, thanks for the correction.
Right. And then so the next column is how many initial training hours. And the initial training hours itself is before they can actually work with the consumer, how many hours is this individual required to actually start working with that client. The next one is following, if it's required that they have the initial, like, additional trainings, right? And that are non-ABA. So sorry, Karen, that's like 2 more columns over.
I'm sorry.
So because those two are kind of similar.
Yeah.
So do they require the RBT, if they're a behavior tech, or maybe if you're working with a multidisciplinary collaboration kind of approach, well, maybe you also have a mental health counselor on board or a licensed psychologist. Do those individuals also need some form of ABA training in addition to the initial Pennsylvania training before they can start working with clients in the scope of behavior analysis in the state of Pennsylvania? And then towards the last part, it kind of breaks it down depending on certain situations. And then if that person requires an additional 24 hours of training within 6 months of them being hired. So they initially need, so for example, I'm going to use real quick, not inside this, a behavior tech. So if you have a behavior tech that's never worked in the field, or let's say has like maybe 3 months of experience, and they just were on board, have not taken any Pennsylvania trainings, they would require 74 hours of initial training. And that initial training will include the initial Pennsylvania mandates, and then also the RBT training, which is 40 hours. And then before they complete and that's prior to them actually working with the consumer. And then while they're working, within 6 months of their initial hire date, they will need an additional 24 hours. So that's like worst case scenario, like a lot of training. I think it comes out to 70 or 98 hours, almost 100 hours mandated within 6 months of a new behavior tech entering the field.
Crystal, I have a question.
Mhm.
So how does the required initial ABA training for providers that are actually providing ABA services? I thought it was 40 hours. So is it 40 hours on top of the 74, or is it 20? A little bit confused here.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
I'm sorry. The required initial ABA training. So for example, we hire a behavior tech. They have no experience, and they have to go through all of the series of experience before we can put him out, and we can start billing, or they can start to become billable. So the initial training is what I consider the health services training, because it's not specific. And then of course they have to have ABA training, because you have to know ABA before you can go out there and implement. And then there's additional job-specific training, which is on top of the initial ABA training. So is it 20 hours or is it 40 hours? Because it's 40 hours to become an RBT.
Right. So for this chart, we're actually looking at is for the higher role. It's not behavioral health technicians. You're looking at behavior consultants, mobile therapy, and behavior analytics services. So the RBT behavior tech would not fall into this place, but you are correct. So they would need that initial we recommend to do the 30 hours only because it says some say 24, some say 30. Might as well just cover the whole 30 hours for behavior tech because they can do the individual therapy and then I get some of that group therapy depending on their role. So if they just do the 30, you're covering all your bases and then they can be more mobile and flexible and they can, get better experience and support other individuals. But yes, for the behavior tech, they would need 40 hours of ABA. And real quick, Karen, Jessica also asked, how do we document history through a resume? And yes, Jessica, that's exactly what you can do. You can do your history. Let's say you have somebody who is doing practicum studies. That also constitutes as previous history and something just for your own record you may want to just have as part of your onboarding through this process is maybe create an attestation of saying that they affirm that they've worked 2 years and can give maybe some examples and a signature. That way you can document it outside of just a simple resume. Sorry.
That's good. Okay, no, not at all. Okay, so here's the other area that I was confused about. And the supervisor, okay, I understand what a supervisor is. And typically a supervisor would be a BCBA or BCABA that provides, supervision to the frontline staff or case management, right? But when this is saying direct care services provider, this is where I get tripped up because, typically my understanding of a direct care service provider is like somebody at a behavior tech level or an RBT level.
Right. So they kind of clumped up direct care service providers as anyone that literally provides direct services to a consumer. So it doesn't have to be your frontline staff. It can be a behavior analyst that is doing one-on-one or doing group therapy because you are physically providing the service. So it's much more broader in that respect.
Okay, got it. And the next chart will go into the requirements of the actual behavior tech, let's say, or an RBT level, and the requirements are for the initial training is higher, it's 40 hours. Okay, the one thing that we kind of went back a little bit, and then we had a discussion with agency owners in Pennsylvania who had spoken up, would actually talk to all of, the state themselves and attended a lot of clarification meetings. And here, this surprised me a little bit because basically BCBAs are, where are they? Waived out of pretty much all of the training requirements. And from a practice perspective, if a BCBA doesn't have any experience, it seems to me that they should be required to take the training, if nothing else, in the initial training, because this is not training that they would have received through course sequence. But that's just something to consider as well. And when we built out our training, so that these trainings are available. And I would strongly encourage, and Crystal, you as well as a clinician, that even the BCBAs who are grandfathered out of these types of trainings receive some training so that they have the background that they need, right, to be as effective as possible as a clinician. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think too, like from the clinician, from the supervisor or the behavior analyst side as well, and especially doing supervision, it's really good to understand what your technicians are actually learning. So that way you can complement that training and have a better approach in supporting those clients and really, providing that behavioral skills training, supervision, more of those approaches. But you can always reflect back onto what they've already learned and build upon those skills. So it's, beneficial all around in that respect as well.
Something else in the mandate that we're not going to get into today is the additional supervision requirements as well. So above and beyond what we're talking about right now, which is the mandated training, there's some additional supervision requirements, which actually is very, very detrimental to the organization when you think about kind of the cost structure, but obviously good for the client because the outcomes will be better because the providers are actually going to be better supervised. So the state of Pennsylvania is going for better outcomes, just like any other state. It's just that during the transition period, there is a lot of activities that need to happen and a lot of requirements that you need to put in place, which obviously makes it onerous because of their deadlines as well, which we thought was completely unrealistic, because weren't the, what was it? Was some group of training had to be in place by January 17th or something like that? Maybe it's in the next chart. Let me go over here.
Yeah, and that had to do with the licensing requirements. So a lot of this has to go with licensing of the organization. All right, Ashley. Hey, Ashley, is there something that HR would need to report training then, if there is? So Ashley, in terms of reporting, real quick, just to kind of take a step back, sorry, Karen. What you want to make sure you have copies of is whoever is the providing trainer, right? Whether that's you as an organization that's been approved as a Pennsylvania state approved trainer, or some organization that is ACE approved, are generally I'm sorry, grandfathered in to provide the PA. Thank you. I still need coffee. Um, So those ones, what you want to do, you want to have documentation of having like a certification for each course that those individuals completed, your staff members. You also want to have a copy of the PowerPoint structures, if that's how they're presented, any kind of outline or something like that to show that you actually met the mandate requirements. And you want to just do that to make sure that you have your books in a row. So when you are audited, you can be like, listen, this individual took, something on sexuality and human development, or whatever the case may be. Then you can say, hey, this was the training that covered that topic, and here's the outline, if it ever came to that. But you do want to have access to that information. And I hope that answered your question.
Something also to mention, this mandated initial training, this actually, if an individual receives the mandated training, then that carries with them. So if they receive the training in one agency, and after experience, they move on to the next agency, that agency who hires the individual with the initial training does not need to, they don't need to have the same staff go through the same initial training as well. Is that correct? Is that my
Correct. Yeah. So once the individual has gone through these initial trainings, then yes, you can carry it from going to the other organization. So it would be kind as an organization to make sure that your actual staff members have access to those certificates, so that way they can grow and prosper as they maybe it's a year down the road, but maybe it's 6 years down the road.
Okay, so we didn't talk about the required maintenance. You were talking about all the initial requirements, things have to be in place within 6 months, but there's ongoing required, what I call maintenance hours as well, which I guess would be almost akin to like the BACV. You have the continuing education hours that you need to meet to maintain your certification. So this isn't an official certification, but there's the maintenance hours of the required ongoing training hours that's built into the mandate as well. So can you just quickly go through how to read this chart? Because I think that we've spent enough time, but if people are referring back to it, then I'd like for them to have a little bit more context.
Okay, so this tried to like sum up everything. If they have a credential and licensure, and then if that individual required that initial training before working with the consumer, do they require that additional ABA training or RBT training before they work with that consumer? And then does that individual require the secondary part of the training that is required within 6 months of hire? And I know I feel like I'm sounding repetitive. And then the final part is, how many hours do they need for continuing education? So each level now is required to show to the state that they're doing some kind of CE activity, CEU if you're a BCBA, BCABA, BCBAT, or some kind of continuing education that is offered through an ACE provider or someone who is a Pennsylvania state provider at the behavior tech level. So the first example is, okay, if you say you have a doctoral level, a BCBA, a BCBA, and it doesn't matter if they have experience or not, that 2 years history of working with persons with developmental disabilities or related diagnoses, these individuals do not require, they get a no. They don't require additional ABA training. They do not require the initial training, and they do not require the training within 6 months. However, they are mandated to show proof that they've acquired 16 hours or 16 CEUs within that calendar year. So basically from the date of hire. Then if you have another individual, let's say you are working with that licensed behavior analyst who is not a BCBA, right? So you can have licensed people in your state that are practicing as behavior analysis but don't have that credential, or you have a licensed psychologist, mental health counselor, etc. And if they have previous experience, worked, have documentation for 2 years, a resume, whatever it may be, they'll still be required for the initial training, and they'll still need the ABA training, right? However, they won't need that training that goes within 6 months. Now, with the asterisk, and I want to thank Jessica for bringing this up, what does it mean? You can substitute coursework. So as we know, someone who is, I'm going to use a licensed psychologist, they generally have, university levels of 8 years of schooling post, high school, and then they also usually have some kind of practicum. They have externships, things like that, usually postdoctorate, maybe 1 or 2 years, things like that, plus while they're in school. So some of their coursework from their transcript could possibly cover some of these areas, including ABA. So what I would suggest, if this is someone who qualifies in this kind of area, another one would be a licensed behavior analyst who is not a BACB credentialed individual. Let's say they're doing their practicum hours, they've completed, and they're just waiting to sit for the test. So their coursework would also cover for the ABA aspect. So grab that, get a hold of their transcript, ask them for their transcript, and just make sure that it's covering those minimal hours that are required. If it is someone who is in their practicum studies and they've completed their coursework at the university level to become a behavior analyst, it's pretty much, they've gone way above and beyond the 20 to 40 hour requirement, depending on their need to this mandate.
Okay, so something else to consider, right? These training hours, and and I like this aspect of what the state of Pennsylvania is doing. They're saying, okay, your staff members need this, these types of training, and they've kind of put out a matrix of who requires what training. But they're also putting another kind of I suppose, a restriction or constraint in place by saying only the trainings that are provided by certain organizations, and one part of that would be the ACE providers, the type 2 providers, well, it's more than that, right? ACE providers through the BACB is grandfathered in, let's say. And then they also have another category of training providers that are directly approved by the state, and university. The coursework is acceptable as well. So if you're not an ACE provider and you do internal training, then those hours would not fit under the requirements that the state mandate has included. Is that correct, Crystal?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So here, RBT with or without experience. Yes, you need the initial health services training. That makes perfect sense. Do they require additional ABA training? Well, of course not, because they're already in RBT, so they receive 40 hours worth of training. Do they require the additional, Pennsylvania mandated training? Yes. And then, this is really interesting because through the BACB, RBTs are not required to have any continuing education, right? They have the 5% requirement that they need to be supervised by a supervisor, but they don't need to have continuing education. And as you can see in Pennsylvania, that's, they've added this additional requirement, because if you are ABC or RBT, you still need to be in compliance with the BACB. The RBTs need to be supervised minimum 5%. But now with the state of Pennsylvania, you have this additional 20 hours per year requirement as well. It's 20 hours, yeah. And the behavior tech with or without experience. Now you have a little asterisk over here. So what does that mean? They require additional RBT training. Okay, you're saying yes.
So if they're a behavior tech without or with experience, right, but they don't have the RBT credential, then they have to take the RBT course that's aligned with the second edition task list. So the PA mandate made that very clear that it has to coincide with the BACB's requirements in that respect.
Mm-hmm. And the second edition, I think, was released last year. And on top of that, just an FYI for you guys, there's also an ethics piece. So the BACB, when they came out with the second edition task list, actually created the ethics code for RBTs, which is separate from the BACB or the BCBA ethics code as well. So that's something to keep in mind, because I do believe that there's training, ethics training, that is part of the RBT, the coursework task list to meet the requirements as well. I'm sorry. As part of the 40-hour training, or in addition to the 40-hour training, you need to have your staff members be trained on the RBT code, ethics code as well. Up here, I just noticed that it's BCBA D, BCBA, and BCABA as well. License, okay, we're going to be covering that next, so let's go. Okay, so Crystal's been super fantastic, and she's amazing at creating tools. So we wanted to provide something for you to try to keep you organized. And because there's a lot going on right now, and if you have 100 staff, I can just imagine, how difficult it's going to be to try to stay on top of all of this. Because remember, inadvertently not meeting the requirements is going to have almost as negative an impact as just deliberately not meeting the requirements as well. So documentation is key, and you need to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row. And this, I guess we're calling it identification sheet. It's a downloadable tool that Crystal created. So Crystal, just quickly, if you want to go through how to use this document, that would be great.
Sure. Can you click your mouse, please?
Oh, sure. Well, first name, last name, hire date. I get that. Okay.
But no, if you actually just click the mouse, so that it'll make it so much easier.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, so all you have to do on this sheet is put in the last name of the staff, the first name, and the hire date. You'll select their service role, so that could be BHT, behavior analyst, clinical director, admin director. And then the next column, you're just going to select what kind of credential do they have, or license, or nothing. So they could be a behavior tech, they could be an RBT, which is an actual credential, etc., BCBA, licensed behavior analyst. Then the next row, next column, I'm sorry, is if that person has experience. Remember, the threshold is generally 2 years. It's a good go. And then if you click again, Karen, that's all you have to put in there. And then it'll tell you, when do they require that initial training based on what you put in before? Do they require the second portion within 6 months of being hired? Does that person need to have more ABA training? And more ABA training, again, if they have a transcript saying that they've completed it, that will, circumvent that piece from the university level. And then if they are required to do the second portion, it'll just tell you exactly when that due date is, right? So let's say they start January 1st, then they need to have that 6-month piece completed within 180 days, 6 months. So that'll automatically tell you when that date is. And then if they're required to actually complete the RBT course, yes or no, based on the other information as well. So that tool is in your downloadable tools section.
Hey,
under
Crystal,
handouts.
Hey, listen, I think that we can easily modify this so that they can use this as like a tracking tool as well, right? You have to keep track of who's got what hours and all that stuff. And it seems to me that we would be able to do that. So we'll tweak it a little bit, because I think that we can come up with a tool that you can also use for tracking purposes as well, because that's going to be your biggest issue, is to keep track of all this stuff. Okay, so I created more work for you. I'm so sorry, but that's okay. Okay, so I think that we have covered most of all of this, but if you would just go through this again, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so this is just kind of a breakdown of the Pennsylvania, the mandated, what sections that the individuals need. And it's broken down, like, here's just an easy way to think about it. If they're a licensed behavior analyst, psychologist without a BACB credential, right? And with experience or without experience, they'll 10 to 1, they're probably going to be required to take this training. If they're an RBT with or without experience, obviously that's 2 years though. If they have experience of 2 years, they're good. Same with behavior techs, they'll require this training. Again, that threshold is 2 years experience on the day of, as of January 17, 2020. So that pretty much covers everyone except for BCBAs.
Okay, so again, BCBAs are opted out, they're grandfathered out, no matter how you get it. That is, what surprises me though, Crystal, is that the BCBAs are actually opted out, but licensed behavior analysts are not. So that surprises me. Okay. And, going back over here, the effective date of all of the training was January 17th. Obviously, it wasn't practical for all the agencies to meet the January 17th deadline. And I know that there were conversations back and forth, and Amy Gable of ABA Support Services, actually, well, we need to give her some kudos because she was the one that brought this to our attention and said, hey, Karen, we really need something that is kind of a program that's a comprehensive program that we can use to meet the state mandates. And she has been very active with Dr. Tierney on the licensure. And so they became very involved with this as well. And I believe some of the feedback that the different agencies have gotten with regard to the January 17th deadline is, oh yeah, this is a deadline, but you know what, in actuality, you probably have another 6 months or so to meet the requirements, just because it just wasn't feasible to meet the deadline. Okay, so again, lots of information, but quickly, Crystal, if you would like to cover this, please.
Mm-hmm. So for that initial training piece, these are the elements that they would be required to do. So part of it is the mandated reporting, and then the next column is what kind of provider can actually do this training for you, and then where you can find a trainer within those capabilities. To offer those trainings to support as you guys go through this. So for the initial training, mandated reporter actually has to be done through Act 31 online training through the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work, and that's 3 hours. The next one is first aid and universal precautions. So basically that's like your first aid and things like that. Now this is a hands-on training and has to be completed with somebody who's an approved provider. Generally you can find that information at the Red Cross or something similar like that who can offer the CPR kind of piece. Your crisis management. So I know for us, like we have some crisis management that does qualify for some of this, but however, if you're a company that actually needs to do something like reactive strategies and crisis management in that kind of piece where you're doing physical or mechanical restraints, then you want to make sure you get with an approved crisis management training provider for that hands-on piece. I know in Florida we use CPAM, PCMA, there's ABC, and I remember Ashley told me the one she uses, I just can't recall off the top of my head, but there's so many out there. Just make sure it's they're state mandated, that it's allowed to be used, that reactive strategy or restrictive procedures allowed to be used in your state. And then the rest of the requirements you can actually do through any kind of online training or in person. Again, that person, that provider has to be either a BACB ACE approved training organization, or that you as the organization have submitted all this information and got approved to be a PA state training provider. Again, those two, it's one or the other. And so we have ABA Business Growth, Special Learning, but you can also find other ACE providers inside the board. And we left some links in your PowerPoints. So the presentation's in your handouts as well. So all those links are clickable when you download those.
And the topics, behavior management skills, coaching. Now, these are the topics that you need to cover, that needed to be covered in the 5240.73 and 83, which is the initial training and what I refer to again as health services, just to differentiate that from ABA training as well. So topic, that needs to cover emotional disturbance and adolescent and child development, ethics, psychotropic medications, including side effects. What we did was we had probably about 90% of the training that was required to meet the state of Pennsylvania requirements, we Special Learning already had, because we've been providing training for almost 10 years now. But there were certain trainings that we did not have in our kind of repertoire, I suppose, that we developed as part of that. And who did Dr. Debbie, right? And she's super fantastic. And she is a PhD level nurse practitioner, and she was one of the subject matter experts when we did the ADHD series. So when we needed this information, we turned to Dr. Debbie. She's been in the field for a long time, and through her agency, she offers behavioral counseling. She offers services, intervention services, medication management services too, with individuals with autism, but other developmental disabilities and non-developmental disabilities as well. So she was a really great person to turn to, because she has really great hands-on live experience in all of these areas. And although she's very familiar with ABA, she's not a BCBA, and that was really important, for us to make sure that there was a different perspective and somebody that had direct hands-on, knowledge of this area as the primary scope of work. And so, just to let you know, over here, Crystal mentioned this. These are not you. These are, you have mandated. You have to get the online training through the University of Pittsburgh, so you don't have a choice about that. And here, approved provider here, you have different options. It's just these are hands-on trainings, so they're not included as part of our training package, obviously, because primarily we're an online training company. Now, if there was sufficient demand, so for example, you guys all got together and said, hey, listen, we really need this training and we can't find it elsewhere. So can you please provide, come over and do a hands-on training, for this particular topic? Yes, we're more than capable of doing that. We can have discussions about that, but just for ease of use, ease of access, cost effectiveness, the online format is something that's very effective and efficient in this particular case. Okay, I talked a lot, so let me go through this. Initial experience, again, health services training for new hires without experience in behavior tech RBTs, which must be completed within 6 months of hire. And these would be the licensed behavior analyst, not BCBAs because they're opted out, licensed psychologists, etc., without the BACB experience and BACB credential, and no experience are required to take these training. RBTs with or without experience also are required to take the additional initial training as well, and the behavior tech, same over there. Okay, so let's see, just training content requirement for this sections, 5240.73, which is the initial health services training, and 5240.83, which specifically is pertains to the service providers as well. So very quickly, documentation skills, systems of care principles, overview of functional behavior assessment. Crystal, I don't think that the mandate actually specifically laid out the content areas, or did they?
Yes, it did.
Oh, it did. Okay, so these are all the areas that need to be covered?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And again, approved training providers, the BACB ACE approved training provider organizations, and Pennsylvania state approved training organizations as well. And so where to find training providers? Well, we didn't want to be self-serving, but obviously we developed this training to meet the requirements of the Pennsylvania agencies based upon the demand and the agency owners that came to us and said, hey, please help. And so if you go to the ABA Business Growth site, you'll be able to find the training as well and special learning as well. Special learning and ABA Business Growth are partner companies. And what we decided to do was primarily under special learning, we provide lots of training to behavior analysts and speech therapists and psychologists and other professionals that provide services to individuals with autism and other developmental disabilities as well, because obviously ABA is the mainstay of what we offer in terms of intervention, but children and individuals, they have different needs, so they have different providers that are providing services. So what we're really focusing on is just really fostering and how do multidisciplinary teams need to work? How do they collaborate so we can all work together in collaboration, in partnership to generate better outcomes? And so that's the primary focus of special learning. When we started to realize that agency owners have an additional level of support that they needed, we carved out the piece of business and called it ABA Business Growth. And special learning is an ACE provider and has been an ACE provider for 10 years now. And ABA Business Growth is a separate entity, so we'll be going through the process of becoming an ACE provider as well. But because the content that we're using for these trainings and other are from special learning, they're automatically, eligible for CE. Here's other ACE providers as well. So, you don't want to be too self-serving, and there are options. So if you click on this link and go to the BACB site, you can find other providers as well. Okay. So the ongoing maintenance annual training. So this is what I would, would be akin to what we call professional development trainings, right? The trainings that you need to keep up with the certification requirements. The individuals that require the training or the positions, people in these kinds of positions would be clinical directors, individual or group providers, behavior consultation people, mobile therapy. And what does mobile therapy mean? Because when I read that, that confused me.
It's more for like the mental health aspect, and they're kind of lumping them with the behavior analysts, but it's people that go to homes and provide, what we consider, traditional counseling in that kind of realm.
Okay, so not ABA in a home-based setting?
No, but they can provide ABA services.
Got it.
It's a little convoluted.
A little confusing. Okay, behavior analytics services and behavior health technicians or assistant behavior consultation and services. Basically everybody,
Yes.
including BCBAs, Crystal, as well. I think so, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
anyone in those roles except for the admin director, if they're exclusively working as an admin director, will need to show some kind of documentation that they're receiving ongoing continuing education, CEU activities, etc.
Mhm. And is this effective date January 17th? Oh, yeah, of course it is. Right. All right, thank you. And okay, we're not going to go through all of this because this is a very extensive and comprehensive chart. I think it is great reference for you guys. So maybe very quickly, Crystal, if you can touch upon that. I want to make sure that we have time allotted for any questions as well.
More questions, yes. Okay, so just to quickly sum this up, one of the things that we did notice was as the clinical director or supervisor, you have to create a plan for your staff members into what kind of continuing education they need. So more specifically, this is probably more geared for the behavior tech level, the BHTs. They need 20 hours. And you have to create an individualized plan for them for those ongoing hours. So what we did is that we took every element that you can find in the Pennsylvania mandates, like what areas they are, and suggest a 1 year, like within 1 year, your behavior tech should tack this level, this level, this level. We've actually developed this up, I think, out to 3 years, and based on different circumstances to help support you guys in figuring out like what kind of trainings they'll be, you want to add to their individual staffing plan. And then it goes into, what's their role within the organization? Are they doing clinic-based versus home and school-based? And kind of what areas you may want to focus on. And then we also have corresponding trainings as well. But that's really just to help you and guide you and try to streamline some of those individualized ongoing trainings that will be required from the supervisory level.
So kudos to Crystal because there has been extensive work that's gone into all of this, but I know that there's still going to be a bit of confusion, clarifications that are needed. So please feel free to get in contact with Crystal directly. And if there's an answer that, if we cannot answer with any level of clarity, we'll definitely reach out to the state of Pennsylvania because this is something that's really important because I know that this is going to be kind of evolving throughout at least for 1 year anyway, and to have a conduit with the state of California to be able to say, hey, this is our interpretation, is this correct, is going to be very beneficial for us as well, for you guys and for us. Okay, so our solution. State of Pennsylvania mandate, we talked about this, very onerous and potentially very expensive and very time consuming as well, right? There's a lot of aspects of this that is going to impact the business of agencies. So what we wanted to do was to create, we were requested by Amy Gable of ABA Support Services to create a one-stop shop, something that was really comprehensive and cost-effective training to meet 100% of the state of Pennsylvania mandated trainings, because right now there isn't a place that you can go to that will provide all of the trainings that you would need in kind of like a one-stop shop type of a format. So that's what we worked on doing, and we were able to create the entire training program within 45 days. I know, the reason we were able to do that was because we had about 90% of the training that was required, and then needed to add a couple modules to meet the requirements that we didn't have for the health services, the initial training as well. The level of provider, okay, can you talk about this real quickly as well? There's so many, I'm sorry, go back. Oh, go back, right here. The staggered date requirements.
Okay, so some of the staggered dates, just to kind of as a memory, July 17, 2020, January 17, 2020, about 2 weeks ago, that's when the state mandate went into effect. And this is to license the organization levels. As part of that licensing requirements are this piece is the training and supervision. There's a couple other elements as well. July 1st, 2020 is when the BHTs need to have that RBT based on the task list second edition. That goes into effect July 1st of this year. So within 5.5 months, something around there. So your new hires will have to take the RBT coursework based on the second task list. And then finally, July 1st, 2022 is for those organizations that work with licensed psychologists. And even though it's 2 years, as of July 1st, 2022, most of the individuals that work as a clinical director or not necessarily admin, but clinical director, even the licensed psychologist should have a BCBA credential. So just planning for that to see if they don't have that and if there's a way to circumvent that with some of their transcripts for those that are currently in those roles. I don't think for our audience that necessarily pertains to everything, but that is an option as well that's changing.
So what we did to meet this requirement is that we created a training sequence just to make it easier for agencies to go, okay, now we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Here's a recommended training sequence along with the training that's provided as part of the Special Learning Pennsylvania mandate training program. Kind of crazy. So you can obviously change out, whatever it is that you want, titles that you think is appropriate that your staff might need. Only you are going to need or have the best understanding of what your staff training requirements are. And what we did was that we built in enough flexibility with enough content that you can have that flexibility that you needed, but have a sequence lined up so that if you want a point of reference to start from, then you have this basically a mapping and a tool, a training sequence that we've laid out. This, we talked about the annual ongoing training, and again, the same thing. We took the training library, which contains I don't remember how many hours of training, the individual trainings that are CE eligible, and Crystal created a recommended path for the different providers levels working in different settings. Great tool, point to start from. You can make modifications as you need, but great point to start. Okay, so what is this one? Yeah, the training to comply with the Pennsylvania requirements, they have restrictions on who can provide the training, right, for it to be eligible to meet your requirements. And as I mentioned before, higher education and approved, CE provider through the BACB, and also missing something. Oh, state approved, training providers as well. And just to give you a little bit of background about special learning, we have been an approved ACE provider for the BACB since 2010. So going on about 10 years now, there's been a lot of changes that have happened in 10 years. And, this being something pretty substantial for the state of Pennsylvania, but there's been a lot of evolution to, the needs of our field as well. We obtained a status to become an approved APA provider for psychologists last year. That was a pretty grueling process. And we were also approved last year to be able to offer CEs for QABA, which is a relatively newer credentialing organization that is similar to the BACB. They have not been around for long. The training requirements or the course sequence requirements, the content is very similar to what the BACB requires, but the maintenance requirements are slightly different. And they're getting a lot of traction because they are now, able to, they have negotiated with the state and insurance companies for them to actually accept QABA licensed providers for services as well. Just another option for you guys. And then of course, the approved state of Pennsylvania. Because we are ACE approved through the BACB, we pretty much were grandfathered in. So, wrote to them and said, okay, this is what we do. This is our history. And they said, oh yeah, of course, you are an approved state of Pennsylvania provider. Any questions about the actual content? And hey, listen, how do I interpret this? Please get in contact with Crystal, and she would be the best person to be able to address that question for you. If there's any additional research that we need, we have other people in the organization who have relationships with the state of Pennsylvania have already established those relationships so that we can get better clarity, especially on a case-by-case basis, because there's always exceptions to the rule. And here's the framework, but your own situation and circumstances are not going to neatly fit into the matrix that we've created. So we provide Crystal as a resource. So training program offerings. So what we did was we broke out our training modules into the different levels or different categories of training. So the initial training, the health services training that keep calling the health services training, and the additional initial training if the provider does not have the BACB certification, and additional training for providers with zero experience, and the maintenance annual ongoing training as well. And I think the next chart is a little bit clearer. All of our training are delivered as recorded webinar training, although there might be some live webinar training that we will offer as part of this program as well. So 24/7 access. We have the courses themselves are structured. So they're post-test after each session, or each, I guess it's each session. Whoops, sorry, I keep going the wrong way. There we go. And here, the maintenance-based training. This is not a course, it's a training library. So your clinicians, and you can go ahead and select the types of training that the content that you want to offer, but it's not a structured, program, meaning, they don't have to take post-test. So you fill in the gaps, knowledge gaps, based upon, your assessment of your staff needs. And that's what that's all about. So cost effectiveness was really, really important. Amy really stressed that this is really putting an additional burden on top of, what the agencies are already having to bear, the cost that they have to bear. So we tried to be really cognizant about, the training and the pricing of it. So what we ended up with was the introductory pricing, because we want to get it out there, we want to get your feedback, and we're going to continue to refine it. And so it's $120 per staff. And that would include all of the 4 different modules that we've talked about over here. Now, if you wanted just the individual, because you have the ABA trainings and all of the rest of the trainings that you need, but all you need is the initial human services content, then the cost is $10 per staff, and these are annual licenses as well. And the licenses never expire. So you can purchase the licenses at the $120, let's say, or the $10 per staff. And because at an introductory pricing, and you might not need it till next year or the year after. No, the licenses don't expire. If your staff needs CEs, then there is an add-on cost to get the continuing education certificates as well. And I think that, okay, I don't know why I'm repeating myself. I think I covered everything, right? Yeah, okay, I did cover everything. So what's included here, 5240.73, initial mandated training, includes the 40-hour RBT training, which is the RBT training based upon the second task list, and also includes the additional ethics training as well that we did with Dr. John Bailey. I'm sure that all of you guys are familiar with Dr. John Bailey. We've been working with him forever and a half. And when this came out, we went to Bailey and Dr. Bailey and said, hey, listen, I know that this is something that you typically would not do, but can you please do the training, the ethics training for RBTs? And he agreed, and we were really excited. And now you guys have the benefit of being able to access that training as well. And I covered bulk licenses. So if you are an agency and you have a number of licenses that, let's say, over 50 licenses that you want to purchase, or at least commit to purchasing, we have additional discounts as well. And you can place your order by completing this form, and or just sending an email to David Diana at speciallearning.com, or Crystal Larson at speciallearning.com. We talked about the exclusions, which is the hands-on training that you need, and also the annual HIPAA training as well is excluded, although we are investigating whether adding the HIPAA training into our package makes sense. Okay, that's it. And I think actually we stayed within the hour, which is quite amazing. Any final questions?
I don't see any final questions unless you guys have about like 30 seconds to submit them, if anything. If not, go ahead and send them to klarson@special-learning.com. And I'm honored that Amy asked us to support her in this and help your state. And that's, I'm honored. So thank you, everyone here.
Yeah, it's such a great need for such a large population of people that ultimately is going to affect so many consumers, that it was a project that we took on, and we're really excited to be able to create the solution. And with your help, we'll continue to refine the solution as well, because the product that we put together is based upon the training that we already had, which fits in and aligns completely with the state mandated requirements. But as we're moving along, so for example, next year, well, obviously your training needs are going to be a little bit different next year than this year because you don't want to have your staff members take the same training over and over again.
Mhm.
So we'll continue to evolve this, and we'd like to evolve this by getting your feedback, and you tell us what you need or what you would like to see so that we can start planning out for 6 months from now, or next year or the year before. And so thank you very much. This actually presentation will be recorded. We'll make it available. We did cover a lot of content. It's pretty dense. And so the recording will be available. And I believe that you're able to download the PowerPoint presentation directly from the GoToWebinar. If not, just let us know and we'll send that to you, as well the tool that the tracking tool that Crystal created. Okay, well, everybody, thank you for attending. Let us know if you have any questions, and have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.